She was alone. It was late. And they had already decided what they were going to do to her. There were three of them. Big. Drunk. The kind of men who laughed too loud in parking lots and mistook silence for invitation. They had been watching her for 6 minutes, she counted later, in the hospital waiting room, staring at a flickering light above her head, trying to make sense of something that refused to make sense. She was a nurse. She had just finished a 12-hour shift. Her feet hurt. She wanted soup and a shower and 8 hours of something that felt like sleep. She was not thinking about danger. She was thinking about soup. That is the thing nobody talks about. The moment before. How ordinary it is. How the worst things in a person's life almost always begin with something embarrassingly small: a parking lot, a wrong turn, a soup craving at 11:30 at night. She said, "Don't touch me." They laughed. And then, a shadow stepped out from between two parked cars, and it was not a shadow at all. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be captured on a gas station security camera, shared 17 million times, dissected on news channels, argued about in comment sections, and turned into a moment that people who were not there still feel the need to have opinions about. But, before the opinions. Before the cameras. Before the world decided what this story meant, there was just a woman, 3 men, a cold parking lot, and one person who chose not to walk away. This is that story. Her name was Claire Maddox, and she had made peace with the fact that her life was not glamorous. She was 31 years old. She drove a 2009 Honda Civic with a cracked dashboard and a passenger side window that only rolled down 70% of the way. She worked the evening shift at Mercy General Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, a level 1 trauma center where the waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee, and where the nights moved between boredom and catastrophe with no warning and no pattern. She had been a registered nurse for 6 years. She was good at it. Not in the way that looks good on a resume, but in the way that matters, the kind of good that patients feel at 3 in the morning when they are scared and in pain and a calm voice says, "I'm here, I've got you, breathe with me." She had no husband. She had a cat named Gerald who was deeply antisocial and whom she loved with a dedication that she occasionally found embarrassing. She had a best friend named Priya who sent her voice memos instead of texts because Priya said typing was for people with patience. She had a 1-bedroom apartment in the Clintonville neighborhood with a broken bathroom cabinet she kept meaning to fix. She had student loans, a gym membership she used 3 times a year, and a savings account that was trying its best. She was not, by any accounting she had ever done, a woman whose life would one day be watched by 17 million strangers. That Tuesday in November began the way most of her Tuesdays began. She woke at 2 in the afternoon, because her shift started at 6 and ended at 6, and she had been sleeping backwards for so long that daylight felt faintly accusatory. She had coffee. She talked to Gerald, who ignored her in the specific way that cats ignore people they love, turning their back but staying in the same room. She changed into her scrubs, the dark blue ones with the small bleach stain near the left hip that she had stopped trying to explain. She drove to the hospital with the radio on a station that played 90s R&B without apology, and she sang along in the unself-conscious way people only sing when they are certain no one is watching. The shift was what a shift at a level 1 trauma center is. It was a man in his 50s who had been in a minor car accident and kept insisting he was fine while clearly not being fine. It was a teenager with a broken wrist who cried not from the pain but from the terror of telling her parents, and Claire sat with her for 11 minutes past the end of her own assignment and helped her figure out the words. It was a code blue and base 7 at midnight that pulled 4 people running and ended, this time, with a life intact. It was 100 small decisions made under fluorescent light with inadequate information and a body that had been awake too long. By the time 6 a.m. rolled around and her replacement arrived, Claire had been on her feet for most of 11 hours. Her shoulders had that specific ache that lived just below the shoulder blades. Her mouth tasted like bad vending machine coffee. She said goodbye to the overnight crew, gathered her bag from her locker, pulled on her coat, a puffy green one that Priya had once described as what a sleeping bag would look like if it had dreams, and walked out through the staff exit into the cold. The parking lot behind Mercy General was not a place designed with atmosphere in mind. It was a rectangle of cracked asphalt ringed by security lights that buzzed in a frequency that lived just below conscious hearing but accumulated over time into a low-grade sense of unease. Several of the lights had been burned out long enough that the hospital maintenance schedule had learned to ignore them. There was a chain-link fence on the south side with a torn section that nobody had repaired. There were always a few cars belonging to overnight staff parked at the far end, under the broken lights, because those were the spots left by the time the evening shift arrived. Claire's Honda was at the far end. She was not thinking about any of this. She was thinking about whether she had the ingredients for the soup she wanted, a very specific kind, the spicy ramen with the soft egg, which required a particular brand of chili oil she may or may not have used up 3 weeks ago, and whether it was worth stopping somewhere or whether she could improvise with what was in her cabinet, and whether Gerald would be sitting on her chest within 4 minutes of her lying down regardless of whether she was ready for him to be. She was walking and thinking about soup when she noticed them. 3 men. Standing near the fence, in the shadow between 2 burned-out lights. She registered them the way a person registers weather, automatically, without alarm, filing them under background. Guys. Probably hospital visitors, or staff from another building, or people cutting through. Columbus was a big city. Parking lots had people in them. This was not information. She kept walking. The first thing that told her this was information was the silence. They were not talking. 3 men standing together in a parking lot at 6 in the morning, and none of them were talking or looking at their phones or doing anything that people standing in parking lots do. They were just watching. Specifically, they were watching her. She adjusted the strap of her bag and did not change her pace and felt her body begin a recalibration that her brain was not quite ready to name yet. Her senses sharpened the way senses do when some deeper, older part of the human system decides something is wrong before the rational mind gets around to agreeing. Colors got slightly brighter. Sounds got slightly cleaner. The distance between herself and her car resolved from a vague estimate into a precise measurement. 60 feet. She kept walking. The men moved. Not all at once. The one on the left shifted first, pushing off the fence with his shoulder, and that movement cued the other two the way pack animals cue each other, not through speech but through some shared frequency of intention. They spread slightly as they moved, and that spreading, that subtle fanning out, was the moment Claire's rational mind caught up with the rest of her body and agreed, this is information. She was still 40 feet from her car. Hey! The one in the middle called it out in a voice that was doing a performance of casual. He was large. Not tall, particularly, but wide in the way that suggested he had been strong once and was now something softer but still substantial. He was wearing a gray hoodie and dark jeans, and he had the expression of a man who had made a decision and was now committed to carrying it through, the expression of someone who had already imagined how this would go. Claire did not respond. She kept walking. I said, hey. Louder now. Closer. They were moving with her, matching her pace, and the one on the right had swung wide enough that he was going to be at her car before she was unless she moved faster, and moving faster was the thing she could not bring herself to do because moving faster was an acknowledgement, and acknowledgement was a door she did not want to open. But the door was opening anyway. Come on, the man in the middle said, and there was something in his voice now that was not quite a question and not quite an instruction, a tone that exists in a narrow space between the two, a tone that is built on the assumption of permission that was never given. Don't be like that. I'm not interested, Claire said. She said it the way she said things to difficult patients, not aggressive, not afraid, just clear. The voice she had spent 6 years developing, the one that said I am a professional who has handled harder things than you, and I need you to hear me. Just want to talk, said the one on the left, who had said nothing until now. He had a thin, stretched-out quality about him, like something that had been pulled too long in one direction. He was smiling. Her car was 20 feet away. She reached into her coat pocket for her keys. The man on the right moved. He was faster than she expected. He stepped directly into her path, and she stopped, and the 3 of them were suddenly arranged in a triangle around her with a geometry that was not accidental and that closed off the angles to her car, to the hospital door behind her, to any direction that was away. Don't, Claire said. Her voice was still steady. She did not know how it was still steady. Some part of her was watching herself from a distance and, being mildly impressed and, also completely terrified and, also thinking, with a surreal corner of her brain that refused to recognize the gravity of the situation, that she really needed to have the maintenance people fix those lights. She had been meaning to bring it up. This was exactly the kind of thing those lights were supposed to prevent. "Don't touch me," she said. The man in the middle laughed. It was a short laugh, more exhale than sound, the laugh of a person who finds something amusing that is not funny, who finds the resistance amusing, specifically, the way certain people find resistance amusing because it confirms for them that the resistance is ultimately meaningless. He reached out. And, from between two parked cars, 12 feet to Claire's left, a figure stepped forward. She did not see him clearly at first. She had a peripheral impression of size, significant size, the kind that reorganizes spatial relationships, and of movement that was controlled in a way that the three men's movement had not been. There was no aggression in the way he moved. There was something more unsettling than aggression. There was economy. Every step placed with a precision that spoke of a body that had been trained so long and so thoroughly that even walking had become a deliberate thing. He stopped 6 feet from the group. He was tall, not absurdly, but enough. Dark jacket. No expression that she could read as anything other than a very specific kind of attention. The kind of attention that is total and quiet and does not telegraph itself. She said, "Don't touch her," he said. His name was Marcus Webb. He had been out of the Navy for 3 years. He had been a SEAL for 9 years before that, and, before that he had been a kid from Dayton, Ohio, who was good at math and terrible at sitting still and who had joined up at 19 because the recruiter had looked at him across a folding table at his high school and said, "Son, I think you might be built for something hard," and Marcus had recognized something in that statement that he had been waiting, without knowing it, his whole life to hear. He had been visiting a friend at Mercy General. A teammate. A man who had taken a different kind of damage than the kind you got from enemy fire, the kind that lived inside, that didn't show on scans, that announced itself in ways that frightened the people who loved him. Marcus had been sitting with him since midnight. Talking about nothing. Playing cards they weren't really keeping track of. Just being present, because sometimes being present is the whole intervention. He had left at 6 when the morning shift took over, and he had walked out into the cold parking lot, and he had seen the 3 men before he saw Claire, because he had been trained for a decade and I have to see the 3 men first. He had watched for 45 seconds. He had seen the geometry. He had seen the fanning out. He stepped forward. "Walk away," he said. 3 words. Flat. Not a request. The man in the middle looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. There was a moment, a breath, where it could have gone differently. Where the math might have worked out to retreat, to pride salvaged quietly, to a story that ended with 3 men walking back to wherever they came from and a woman driving home to her cat. The man in the middle decided against the math. He said something that is not worth repeating, and he stepped toward Marcus. What happened next lasted 14 seconds. The gas station security camera across the street captured most of it, though the angle was partial and the resolution was the gray, swimming quality of footage shot in the dark at a distance designed for license plates, not bodies. What the camera showed was 3 men moving toward 1 man, and then, a period of motion too fast for the frame rate to fully resolve, and then, 3 men on the ground in varying states of incapacitation. What the camera did not show, what no camera could have shown, was what Marcus Webb was thinking during those 14 seconds. He was not thinking about anything. That was the training. Not blankness, exactly. More like a channel being cleared. Every thought that was not relevant removed. Every distraction gone. Time did not slow down for him the way people said it did. If anything, it sharpened, clarified, became more precise. He was aware of every point of contact, every shift in weight, every telegraphed commitment of momentum. He was aware of pain in the way you are aware of weather, as information, not as experience. 14 seconds. 3 men on the ground. 2 of them stayed down. The third tried to stand and reconsidered. Marcus stepped back. He was breathing at the rate of a man who had walked, not run. He straightened his jacket. He turned to where Claire was standing 8 feet away, her keys in her hand, her bag clutched against her chest, watching him with an expression he did not have the vocabulary to name. She was shaking. She did not know she was shaking until she tried to speak and realized that her voice had gone somewhere it did not immediately return from. "Are you hurt?" he asked her. She shook her head. He nodded once. He looked at the 3 men on the ground. The one who had reconsidered getting up was looking at the asphalt with the concentration of someone who had found the most important piece of asphalt in the world. "I'm going to call the police," Marcus said. "Okay," Claire said. She said it in the voice of someone who has just realized that her soup craving was the last uncomplicated thought she was going to have for a very long time. The police arrived in 7 minutes. Claire knew it was 7 minutes because she had looked at her watch twice, once immediately after Marcus made the call, and once again when she heard the sirens, and the gap between those 2 moments was the longest 7 minutes she had ever experienced in her life, including the one time she was stuck in an elevator for 22 minutes and the summer she was 14 and waiting for a boy named Derek Chen to text her back. She stood in the cold with her green sleeping bag coat zipped to the collar and, her keys still in her hand, she could not seem to put them away. Her hand simply refused the instruction, and she watched the parking lot with the concentrated attention of a woman who had recently learned that parking lots were not as neutral as she had always assumed. The 3 men were still down. The one who had tried to stand was sitting now, holding his wrist against his chest with the careful, folded posture of a man experiencing the specific pain of something that has been bent in a direction it was not designed to go. The other 2 were lying in the particular flattened way of people who have had all the structural ambition taken out of them and are currently engaged in nothing more complicated than breathing and reconsidering their decisions. Marcus Webb stood 12 feet from her, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the perimeter of the lot with the patience of someone who was used to waiting in bad places and had made his peace with it long ago. They had not spoken much after the police call. He had asked her once more if she was hurt. She had confirmed again that she was not. He had given a small nod, the nod of someone filing that information away. And then they had both stood in the cold without speaking, which should have been uncomfortable and wasn't, exactly. It was something else, something that Claire could not identify precisely, something that sat adjacent to safety in a way she didn't entirely trust. When the squad cars pulled in, lights going, a small domestic drama of blue and red washing across the asphalt, Marcus turned to her and said, "You don't have to stay if you don't want to. Give your statement, then, go." She looked at him. "Don't you have somewhere to be?" "Not right now," he said. The officers were young. Both of them. One looked barely old enough to have made the decision to be an officer. He was the one who took her statement, standing by his cruiser with a notepad, and he had the focused, slightly performative seriousness of someone still learning how to carry authority in his body, still figuring out the right place to put his hands. He asked her the question she expected: "What happened? Did you know these men? What did they say to you?" She answered them clearly and completely. She was good at it, she discovered. 6 years of telling patients' families bad news in hospital hallways had apparently given her a facility for staying functional under pressure, for organizing her experience into sentences, for not crying until she was somewhere appropriate for crying. Marcus gave his statement to the second officer with the brevity of someone who was practiced at delivering information in the smallest possible unit. He did not embellish. He did not perform. He described what he had observed, what he had determined, what he had done. The officer wrote it down and looked up at him with an expression that contained both professional and personal assessments and seemed uncertain which to act on. All 3 men were cuffed and put in cars. The middle one, the one in the gray hoodie, the one with the reaching hand, looked at Claire as they walked him past her. She held his eyes. She did not look away. She had not planned this, it was simply what her body decided to do, and she let it. He looked away first. By 7:30 it was over. Statements taken. Contact information exchanged. One of the officers told her someone would be in touch about the case. She thanked him by name, which flustered him in a way she found briefly, guiltily satisfying. She turned and Marcus was there, 10 feet away, and the question of what happened now was suddenly present between them in a way that neither of them had apparently considered. "Thank you," she said. It came out inadequate. It came out the way thank you always comes out when it is being asked to carry more weight than the English language designed it to carry. She was a nurse. She was good with words in a crisis. She had held people's hands and found the right thing to say in rooms where the right thing to say felt impossible. And, here, in a parking lot, to this man who had stepped out of the dark and fundamentally altered the story of her morning, she had produced, thank you. Marcus Webb looked at her with the expression of a person who understood that thank you was standing in for something much larger and did not require the something larger to be named. You good to drive? He said. Yes. Okay. He turned to go. She did not know why she said the next thing. She decided later that it was the cold, or the adrenaline hangover, or Gerald, who was somewhere in her apartment probably sitting on her pillow and waiting with the passive-aggressive patience of a very small and deeply unreasonable creature. Do you want coffee? She said. He turned back. She held up both hands, a gesture that was half explanation and half self-defense. There's a place 2 blocks from here. I don't particularly want to be in my apartment alone right now, and I've apparently developed a conversational policy of saying things before I think about whether they make sense. He looked at her for a moment. Something in his face shifted in a way she could not fully parse, not softening, exactly, but a slight releasing of something that had been held. Yeah, he said. Okay. The coffee shop was called Lamplight, and it was the kind of place that opened at 6 a.m. to serve hospital workers and night shift people and insomniacs, the kind of people whose relationship with morning was complicated. It smelled like espresso and butter and had exposed brick and too many plants and the specific warm hum of a room that has been occupied continuously through the cold hours and accumulated the heat of human presence. Claire ordered her usual without thinking black coffee and a butter croissant that she would eat half of and feel guilty about, which was a ritual she performed 3 times a week and had never once succeeded in skipping. Marcus ordered black coffee, no food, and paid before she could reach for her card. They sat across from each other in a small booth near the window. Outside, Columbus was waking up. Cars. Dog walkers. A man on a bicycle with a messenger bag who was going somewhere with more urgency than the hour seemed to require. You were visiting someone, Claire said. Not a question, she had registered it during his statement to the officer. At the hospital. A friend, Marcus said. She did not ask more. She recognized the particular way those 2 words were placed, the weight behind them, the wall they were doing double duty as both answer and boundary. She had spoken that same sentence herself, about people she loved, when the full answer was something she was not ready to make someone else carry. She respected the 2 words. How long were you in? She asked instead. He looked at her. Navy. How'd you know? The officer looked at you like he wanted to take a photograph, she said. That's usually a military thing or a movie star thing, and you don't strike me as a movie star. Something shifted in his face again. 12 years. Out for 3. Do you miss it? The question surprised him. She could see it, a small recalibration, a moment of someone deciding whether to give the answer they usually gave or a different one. Parts of it, he said. Which parts? He wrapped both hands around his coffee. His hands were large in a way that was not incidental, the kind of large that comes from specific use, from years of weight and grip and work. Knowing exactly what your job is, he said. Knowing exactly who you're with. There's a clarity to it that you don't always find on the outside. Claire nodded. She understood clarity as a thing you could miss. She understood it in the way she understood the specific piece of a night shift when everything ran smoothly, the clean simplicity of a job that needed doing and a body and mind that knew how to do it and nothing complicated in between. I've been a nurse for 6 years, she said. And I still don't entirely know how to explain what I do to people who haven't done it. They hear nurse and they think thermometers and paperwork. They don't think. She stopped. What do they not think? They don't think about the 3 a.m. when someone is dying, and they know it, and their family isn't there, and the thing between them and dying badly is just you. Whatever you can bring to that room. Whatever you know how to be in that moment. She said it plainly. Not performing vulnerability, not seeking response. Just the truth of the job, stated without decoration. He was quiet for a moment. That's a heavy thing to carry. You carried heavier. Different weight, he said. Not heavier. They drank their coffee. The croissant got eaten. The city outside got louder and more committed to being morning. She asked him about Ohio. He was from Dayton, she was from Cleveland, and they spent 15 minutes in the mild competitive mythology of two Ohio cities asserting their particular personality to someone from the other one, which is a very specific kind of conversation that Ohioans have with each other and that no one from outside the state fully understands. He laughed twice. Not the big performed laugh of someone trying to signal warmth, but the short, involuntary kind that happens when something is actually funny, a laugh that arrives before the decision to laugh. She noticed this. She filed it away without examining why she was filing it. She told him about Priya and the voice memos. He told her about his dog, a 3-year-old German shepherd named Sargent who had been found in a shelter where his previous owner had surrendered him for being too intense, which Marcus delivered as though it were the most relatable thing he had ever heard. She laughed at this. A real laugh. And, for a moment, a brief, interior moment, she was thrown back 5 years. She did not explain it. She did not reference it. She picked up her coffee and she kept going because that was what you did, that was what she had learned to do, and the anger that followed the jump backward was sweet and familiar, and she wrapped herself in it like the green sleeping bag coat and let it do the work it always did. Marcus did not notice. Or if he noticed, he gave it room, which amounted to the same thing. By 9 o'clock they had been there for 90 minutes and the coffee shop had filled around them with the ordinary noise of an ordinary Tuesday morning, and Claire became aware that she had not thought about soup in over an hour, which was a form of progress. I should go, she said. Yeah, he said. She pulled on her coat. He stood when she stood, which was the kind of thing her mother would have called good raising and which she noticed and did not comment on. She picked up her bag. She looked at him across the small table. That thing you did, she said. In the parking lot. Have you had to do that before? He held her eyes. Yes. But, not here. Not like this. No, he said. Not like this. She nodded. There was something in his answer that she needed the shape of, the edges of, and she had found them. She was not sure what to do with them. She took out a card from her bag, a plain white card with her name and number, the kind she gave to patients' families in case they had follow-up questions. She set it on the table between them. I know you were just doing what you do, she said. But, it mattered. To me specifically, it mattered, and I wanted you to know that. She walked to the door. She pushed it open and felt the cold come in, and she walked out into the brightening morning, and she did not look back, and she did not know yet that he would pick up the card and put it in his jacket pocket and that he would carry it there for 3 days before he did anything about it. She drove home. She fed Gerald, who had butted her ankle once, which was the equivalent of a standing ovation from him. She made the ramen with improvised chili oil and it was fine. She lay down on her bed and Gerald got on her chest within 4 minutes, exactly as predicted. She stared at the ceiling. The parking lot was still with her. It would be with her for a long time. Not in the shattering way, not in the way that breaks sleep and rewrites personality. She had already been through that kind of thing, 5 years ago, and she knew the difference between a wound and a bruise. This was a bruise. This was something you pressed with your finger and felt the tenderness of and then let your body do its work on. What stayed was not the fear. The fear was already metabolizing, already breaking down into something her system could process and file. What stayed was the way he had stepped out of the dark. 12 feet to her left, from between 2 parked cars, without announcement, without theater. Just there. The word she kept coming back to was the word he had used himself, clarity. She had seen it in his body before she understood what she was seeing. The absence of confusion, of hesitation, of the social negotiation that most people are always doing, that silent constant recalibration of what do I do here, is this my business, what will people think? all of that stripped away. Just the situation, and what the situation required, and someone who knew how to be that thing without being asked. She had spent 6 years learning to be like that in her own rooms, in her own domain. She recognized it in him the way you recognize something in another person that you have been trying to build in yourself. Gerald started purring. She put her hand on his back and felt the vibration of it and thought about the card she had left on the table and whether leaving it had been a statement or an impulse or some complicated middle ground where statements and impulses are the same thing. She decided it didn't matter. She closed her eyes. She slept. He called on a Thursday. She was in the hospital break room, eating a granola bar that she had purchased from a machine on the third floor under the duress of a skipped lunch, when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize and she answered it on the second ring in the way she always answered unknown numbers, as though it might be something important, because in her life it often was. "This is Claire," she said. "Marcus Webb." A brief pause. "From the parking lot." She set down the granola bar. "I know which Marcus." "Right." Another pause. The pauses had a quality to them, not awkward, exactly, but the pauses of someone who had spent a long time in environments where unnecessary words were not just unwelcome but potentially dangerous, and who had carried that economy into civilian life without entirely meaning to. "I wanted to make sure you were all right." "I'm all right," she said. "Are you calling to make sure I'm all right, or is there a different sentence hiding behind that one?" The silence that followed lasted 4 seconds. Then, there might be a different sentence. She smiled at the break room wall. "There's a farmer's market on Saturday morning. Near Goodale Park. I usually go around 9 and spend 40 minutes buying vegetables I have strong intentions about and, then, a coffee I actually drink. You're welcome to join either or both of those activities." This time the silence was shorter. "I'll find it." The farmer's market was cold and bright in the particular way of November mornings that are trying their best. The sky was the clean, hard blue that only happens after temperature drops, and the stalls were strung with lights that were unnecessary in the daylight but cheerful anyway, and the smell of the whole thing was wood smoke and apples and the aggressive cinnamon of a donut vendor who took his product personally. Marcus was already there when she arrived. This did not surprise her. He was standing at the edge of a produce stall with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at a display of root vegetables with an expression that suggested he was either deeply interested in parsnips or deeply somewhere else. She came up beside him and he turned before she was close enough to have reasonably been heard, which she clocked and chose not to comment on. "You got here before 9, she said. "I'm an early person." "I figured." They walked. She did the thing she always did, moved between stalls with a domestic purposefulness that was half intention and half theater, picking up vegetables and putting some back and adding others to the canvas bag she'd brought, conducting a silent internal negotiation between what she genuinely needed and what looked good. He walked beside her with the comfortable, measured pace of someone who had learned to move at whatever speed the situation required. She bought sweet potatoes. She bought a bunch of kale that she told herself she would use and that Gerald would probably try to eat a corner of and then abandon. She bought a small jar of local honey from a woman named Margaret who gave her the honey as though it were a consecrated thing, which Claire respected. She bought the coffee. He did not buy anything. He watched her buy things with the focused, unobtrusive attention that she had first noticed in the parking lot, present in a way that most people are not present, without being invasive about it. They found a bench near the edge of the park. The city moved around them: joggers, a woman with 2 very small dogs dressed in matching coats, a group of elderly men who appeared to be arguing about something with the joyful intensity of people who have known each other long enough to argue about everything. "Your friend," Claire said. "The one at the hospital." Marcus looked at the park. "Danny." She waited. "We were in the same unit for 6 years. He's the kind of man who keeps everything working by the force of his own will, and then, one day the will runs out, and the everything just, he stopped. He's getting help now. He's in a better place than he was." "That's good," she said. "Yeah." She understood this too. She understood it in the professional sense. She had spent 6 years watching people metabolize suffering at different speeds and with different results. She understood it in the personal sense as well, which she kept in a place that she had not opened the door to in a long time, but which she was now in a park, on a cold bench, with a man she had known for 4 days, holding coffee and a jar of honey, aware of his being slightly less locked than it usually was. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "In the parking lot. When you stepped out. You were completely," she searched for the word, "still. Inside. You didn't have any fear?" He turned to look at her. He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated. He was not someone who deflected serious questions with casual answers, and she had already stopped expecting him to be. "It's not that there's no fear," he said. "It's that the fear becomes data. Just information. Telling you things you need to know. Instead of an experience you're having, it's just another input." It took years. She thought about this. "I do that," she said. "In certain rooms. Not all rooms. But certain ones." "I know," he said. She looked at him. "I could tell," he said. "In the parking lot. After. You were scared, but you were also processing. Cataloging. Your hands shook, but your voice didn't." She had not known he had noticed the hands. "Hazard of the job," she said. "Or the training," he said. "Which is the same thing." They sat with that for a moment. Two people who had arrived at a similar internal architecture through completely different routes, recognizing the construction in each other the way builders recognize buildings. "I was married," Claire said. It came out before she decided to say it. That happened to her sometimes, a sentence that had been waiting its turn for a long time stepping forward without being called. Marcus did not react except to be quiet in a slightly different quality of quiet. "For 2 years. It ended badly is too small a word for it. The badly of it is where the 5 years came from. The thing I said, in the coffee shop." She looked at her cup. "I don't usually explain that." "You don't have to explain it now," he said. "I know." She looked up at the park. "I wanted to. I don't know why I wanted to. I'm aware that I've known you for 4 days and this is extremely fast. I've known people for 4 hours who I trust with my life," he said. "Time is a bad metric." "Is that a military thing?" "It's a human thing," he said. "Military just strips away the distractions." She looked at him. He was looking at the park, and the cold morning light was on the side of his face, and she thought about what it meant to strip away the distractions, not as a metaphor, but as a practice, as something you woke up every day and chose. She thought about what it would mean to know a person the way you know terrain, not through accumulated gossip and social performance and the slow, anxious accumulation of biographical data, but through presence. Just presence. Just, I see how you move, and I see what you are, and I'm not confused. She had not been seen clearly in a long time. Or she had, and it had been used against her. The distinction mattered. "The video is online," she said. This had happened on Wednesday. Someone had found the gas station footage, grainy, partial, shot from a bad angle in the dark, and someone else had identified the Mercy General Staff parking lot, and someone else had connected it to the police report, which was a matter of public record, and within 48 hours the clip had been everywhere. It had the qualities that make clips everywhere: an underdog, a threat, a sudden reversal. 17 million views. Hundreds of thousands of comments. News channels with opinions. Opinion channels with more opinions. Reddit threads that had metastasized into debates about violence and justice and gender and the proper place of former military personnel in civilian conflicts, which were debates that had very little to do with a cold parking lot in Columbus, Ohio, at 6 in the morning, and everything to do with whatever those people needed to be debating. A journalist from a local news station had already reached out to her. She had not responded. She did not know yet if she would. "I know," Marcus said. "People are," she paused. "People have a lot of feelings about it. People always have feelings about things they weren't there for. Does it bother you? The attention?" He was quiet for a moment. A real moment, not an avoidant one. She had already learned to tell the difference. "What I did in that parking lot is not the most significant thing I've done in my life," he said. "It's getting the most attention. That's a strange ratio to sit with." She understood this at a frequency that had no good language. She said, "What would you want people to know? If you could just say it." Outside the comments. He looked at her with an expression that took her a moment to identify. It was not a complex expression. It was actually a very simple one. It was the expression of someone being asked a question by a person they believe will actually hear the answer, and experiencing the specific, quiet surprise of that. That it wasn't about being a hero, he said. It was about being a person. "I was in a parking lot and something wrong was happening. I had the ability to stop it. So I stopped it. That's the whole story." She nodded slowly. "That is actually the whole story." "Yeah. People don't like simple stories," she said. "They need it to be bigger. They need it to be about something." "It's about something," he said. "It's about a woman saying 'don't touch me,' and that meaning something. That being enough." He paused. "That's not a small thing." She felt the weight of it. The plain weight, the unheroic weight, the weight of something that should be ordinary and isn't. She looked out at the park. The woman with the two small dogs in matching coats came past again, and both dogs strained toward Claire with the democratic enthusiasm of creatures who had decided she was interesting, and she let one of them sniff her hand, and it licked her knuckle once with the full commitment of an animal that does not do things by halves. "My cat would destroy these dogs," she said. Marcus laughed. Not the short involuntary one. A longer one. A real laugh, open and unguarded, briefly reorganizing his whole face into something different. She filed it away with the others. After the market they walked for a while and, then, he drove her back to where she'd parked and, they stood on the street in the cold for a moment with the comfortable irresolution of people who are not yet done with each other but are not ready to say that plainly. "My dog," he said. "Sergeant. He'd be okay with Gerald. Gerald is antisocial. He's hostile to new mammals as a category. Sergeant is very patient. I'll believe it when I see it." "Okay," he said. And the word had something in it. Not a small word. She drove home. The case moved through the system the way these things move, slowly, with the bureaucratic momentum of a process that is thorough because thoroughness is the only leverage it has against the arguments that will inevitably be made. All three men were charged with assault with intent and related offenses. Their defense attorneys found angles, as defense attorneys do. The process took months. Claire testified once, in a room that was less dramatic than television had prepared her for, speaking clearly in the voice she had spent 6 years building, saying what had happened in plain language and letting it be plain. 2 of the 3 men pleaded guilty to reduced charges and were sentenced to time served and probation and mandatory programs that had outcomes that nobody could predict. The third went to trial, and the trial produced a verdict that was not as satisfying as she had hoped, and she sat with the unsatisfying verdict in the way you sit with things that do not resolve cleanly, which is most things. The journalist called 4 more times. The 4th time, she answered, and she gave an interview that she spent 3 days preparing for and 10 minutes delivering. She said what Marcus had said, in her own words, "I said don't touch me. A person heard me. That is the story." She said it knowing some people would make it larger and some people would make it smaller and that neither group had been in the parking lot. Priya sent her a 37-second voice memo that was mostly screaming. Sergeant did meet Gerald. This happened on a Sunday in December, 6 weeks after the market. Gerald expressed his position on new mammals in the traditional way, a sustained noise from the top of the refrigerator, while Sergeant sat below and looked up with the specific patience of a creature that has decided something is worth waiting for and has the time. Marcus sat on her kitchen floor with his back against the cabinet and watched his dog wait out her cat with an expression that was private in the way certain expressions are private, not closed, just interior, held for the self and not performed for any audience. She handed him coffee. He took it without looking up. "Give it 15 minutes," he said. 14 minutes later, Gerald descended from the refrigerator with the dignity of a person who has decided to stop being right about something. He walked across the kitchen floor and sat 3 feet from Sargent and looked at him with the ancient, assessing gaze of a creature who has survived this long precisely by not making fast decisions. Sargent's tail moved once. Slowly. Gerald blinked. It was not forgiveness. It was not friendship. It was the beginning of a negotiation, which was, for Gerald, the highest form of respect. Claire sat down on the floor next to Marcus. They watched the negotiation. Outside, Columbus went about its business. Somewhere a parking lot was empty and cold and lit by lights that mostly worked. Somewhere 3 men were somewhere in the long, administrative aftermath of a 14-second decision. Somewhere a granola bar was waiting in a vending machine on the 3rd floor of a hospital for someone who skipped lunch. The ordinary world, enormous and indifferent, doing what it always does. And, inside it, small and specific and true, a man who heard a woman say "don't touch me," and listened, and acted, and, later, in a kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, sat on the floor and drank bad coffee and watched a German shepherd outlast a cat. That was the whole story. It was enough.